Welcome to our deep dive into the world of Srinivasa Ramanujan, a mathematical genius, you say. Well, today we're going to try to uncover the man behind the math using this biography, The Man Who Knew Infinity. Like, how did he even start to develop all these crazy ideas in a place so different from, like, the big universities and stuff in Europe?
That's what makes his story so interesting,
Yeah.
right? It's not just about the formulas and all that. It's about the journey. A guy who saw numbers in a completely different way. And to understand that, we have to go way back to his roots.
So let's rewind all the way back. Imagine growing up in this temple town in South India, Kumbakonam, right on the banks of the Kaveri River, a world away from like the hustle and bustle of the West.
Yeah, it's essential to get that context. South India in the late 1800s, totally different vibe. Super spiritual, really connected to nature, and the Kaveri River, that was like the heart of everything.
And unlike other parts of India dealing with droughts, the Kaveri Delta was actually super fertile.
Exactly. So you have the stability, thanks to the Kaveri, and it creates this unique environment where traditions can flourish. And spirituality, it's woven into everyday life. It makes you think about how all of that might have shaped how Ramanujan saw the world. Maybe even how he approached math.
Yeah, like maybe that stability let his mind wander and explore those abstract ideas more freely. Almost like the fertile ground, like you said, helped his mathematical ideas to flourish. So when did this whole math genius thing start to show? Was he like a prodigy from day one?
Oh, absolutely. Stories of him solving these complex math problems when he was just a kid, helping out his classmates. But here's the thing, the schools back then, they didn't really know what to do with a mind like his.
Wait, are you saying they like held him back?
There's this almost unbelievable story, right? They took away his calculus textbook because it was like distracting him from his other schoolwork.
Worry.
Crazy, right?
That's wild. Can you imagine? But that obviously didn't stop him. He had these notebooks, right? Packed with like tons of theorems and formulas.
Yeah, those notebooks. They became his world, a place where he could just create. And it wasn't just equations, it was all written in this unique notation, almost like his own mathematical language.
Wow. They sound legendary. But besides his own curiosity, was there anything that sparked that initial interest? Like what got him going?
Well, there's this key moment. Ramanujan comes across this textbook, Synopsis of Elementary Results in Pure Mathematics. It was by George Shoebridge Carr. And honestly, it was outdated even back then. But for Ramanujan, it was pure gold.
What was so special about it? It wasn't like a revolutionary book or anything.
Right? Nope. The interesting thing is, it focused more on the results of theorems, not the methods to prove them. Like, Carr would present a formula in its simplified form. But back then, textbooks made it way more complicated.
So it was kind of like a puzzle book for him.
Exactly. Instead of being given the steps, he had to figure out the proofs himself. He had to develop his own methods. It's like the book's limitations accidentally fueled his genius.
That's incredible. It makes you think how many other brilliant minds are out there just waiting for the right spark. But even with this self-driven learning, he still wanted recognition, right? I mean, who wouldn't?
Oh, absolutely. Ramanujan's journey was far from easy. He really struggled to find work and to get people to take him seriously, especially in a society that was all about, degrees and qualifications. And he didn't have a formal degree.
So he's brilliant, but he can't get a decent job because of the system. That's rough.
He even approached Professor Ramaswamy Iyer, the founder of the Indian Mathematical Society, hoping for some support. But even though the professor was impressed by his work, that lack of a traditional background made him hesitate.
So what did he do? He couldn't just give up.
Oh, he didn't. He traveled all over South India, approaching anyone who might listen, showing them his notebooks. Talk about determination.
And finally, he got that clerkship at the Madras Port Trust, right?
Yeah, he did. But for Ramanujan, it wasn't just a job. It was a way to buy himself time to do his research, his math. He basically saw his intellect as its own kind of status symbol.
It's like he was saying, I got to do this to survive, but my real work is mathematics. He knew what he was meant to do, but it was still a struggle, right?
Definitely. Luckily for him, Sir Francis Spring, an engineer at the Port Trust, saw how brilliant he was and helped connect him with some British mathematicians. That was a huge turning point.
And that's when things start to get really interesting. That connection led him to G.H. Hardy, a famous mathematician at Cambridge, right?
Exactly. That connection, all because of a letter, would change math history forever.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the life of Srinivasa Ramanujan. So last time we left off, Ramanujan was getting ready to head to England after Hardy invited him. I bet that was a pretty overwhelming experience.
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, talk about a leap of faith, leaving his family, his home, everything he knew, to go to a completely different world.
And not just any world. He's going to the heart of, like, British mathematics. That had to be a massive culture clash.
No kidding. England in the early 1900s, think tradition, hierarchy, whole lot of, British Empire vibes. For an Indian man and one without the usual academic background trying to fit in there must have been incredibly tough.
And then on top of all that, World War I starts brewing. Europe's on edge.
Exactly. Definitely not the most peaceful setting for, deep mathematical thinking.
I can imagine. Okay, so let's talk about Hardy. How did that partnership actually work? Did they click right away, or was it a little bumpy at first?
Well, Hardy was, all about rigor and analysis. So at first he was pretty skeptical of Ramanujan's intuitive style.
Yeah.
He saw the brilliance, but he also saw the need for more, proof.
Like a clash of styles, intuition versus the academic method.
Yeah, kinda. But it wasn't a, ego thing. They both respected each other's smarts. They just had different strengths and were willing to learn from each other.
A real partnership, then. Did they make any big breakthroughs early on?
One of their biggest was their work on the partition function. Remember, we talked about that. How many ways you can split a whole number into smaller integers?
Yeah, but refresh my memory. Why was that such a big deal in math?
Well, it seems simple, but the number of partitions explodes as the numbers get bigger. 5 has 7 partitions, but 100 has over 190 million.
Whoa, okay, yeah, that's a lot of partitions. So how did they even approach that?
Ramanujan, he just had this knack for seeing patterns, He'd already come up with some formulas for approximating the partition function, but they weren't perfect.
So he had the ideas, but needed help refining them.
Right, and that's where Hardy's skills came in. He was a master of proof and analysis. They combined Ramanujan's insights with Hardy's rigor and ended up with this amazing formula. It could estimate the partition function even for huge numbers.
Amazing. A real team effort. And that wasn't all they did, right?
Not even close. They collaborated on a ton of stuff, published papers that really pushed number theory forward. They were both so dedicated to, finding mathematical truth.
It's kind of mind-blowing. These two guys from such different worlds coming together like that, it really shows how powerful collaboration can be. But I have to ask, Ramanujan was deeply religious, right? Did that ever create any conflict in that very secular academic world?
That's a good question. There's no doubt his beliefs were central to who he was. He often said his math insights came from divine inspiration, and he stayed a devout Hindu his whole life.
So how did he balance that with Western mathematics?
It seems like he kept those parts separate. He could dive into the logic of math and still hold on to his spiritual side.
I wonder if those two ways of thinking actually helped each other. Like maybe his intuition, his ability to see those hidden patterns, was somehow connected to his spirituality.
It's an interesting thought. Maybe there's a link between the feeling of awe you get from both, deep math and deep spiritual experiences.
Maybe. Okay, so back to England. It wasn't all sunshine and roses for Ramanujan, was it? His health took a turn for the worse.
Yeah, unfortunately, he got tuberculosis. Really bad news back then.
And people thought the English climate and food weren't helping either, right?
Yeah. The winters are harsh, and as a strict vegetarian, finding good food during wartime had to be tough.
So he's dealing with a serious illness, trying to adjust to a whole new way of life, and still doing groundbreaking math. Talk about resilience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Shows that his genius wasn't just about intellect, it was passion, perseverance. He was dedicated to his calling.
I bet leaving England and going back to India was a really tough decision.
Definitely heartbreaking. But in the end, I think he missed home. He missed his family. He went back in 1919 hoping the warmer climate would help him get better.
So he returns to India, a celebrated mathematician. What was the reaction like?
Heroes welcome. His achievements made India incredibly proud. Especially at a time when they were fighting for independence, he became this symbol of Indian intellect, a guy who showed what was possible despite, colonial rule.
A real story of triumph. But sadly, his health didn't improve back in India.
No, he died in 1920, only 32 years old.
Such a loss for mathematics. It makes you wonder what he could have done if he'd lived longer. But even in that short life, he left such a huge mark.
For sure. Those notebooks, full of his incredible ideas, they're still inspiring mathematicians today.
And his story inspires people all over the world, proof that brilliance can come from anywhere and that the pursuit of knowledge can break down any barrier. Okay, so we've talked about his journey to England, his partnership with Hardy, his struggles, and his triumphs. But there's one more thing we need to explore. Those mysterious Mach theta functions he discovered in his last year. What were those things, and why was he so fascinated by them?
They're like these math shapeshifters. Always changing, hard to pin down. They're related to theta functions, which are pretty well understood. But these Mach theta functions, they have their own weird properties that make them super tricky.
So even Ramanujan found them puzzling.
Even him. He knew they were important. He could sense their potential, but he didn't have the time to really dig into them. He wrote to Hardy about them, all excited, but also frustrated that he couldn't explore them more.
It's like he was passing the torch, challenging other mathematicians to figure them out.
Yeah, exactly. It took decades before mathematicians really started to make headway with them.
So what did they find out? What makes these Mach theta functions so special?
Turns out they have these deep connections to areas of math that Ramanujan couldn't have even dreamed of, like string theory, black holes, quantum physics. It's like he was glimpsing into the future of math.
Wow. A mathematical time traveler. So even at the very end, he was still pushing boundaries, leaving behind this legacy that would keep mathematicians busy for generations.
He was. His work on those Mach theta functions really shows his genius,
Yeah.
his ability to see connections that nobody else could, and his love for the beauty and mystery of math.
A perfect final chapter to an amazing story. Okay, so in this deep dive, we've covered a lot. Ramanujan's early life, his journey to England, his collaborations, his struggles, his triumphs, and the lasting impact of his work. But what does it all add up to? Why is his story still so powerful almost a century after his death?
That's what we'll talk about in our final part.
Welcome back to our final deep dive into the world of Srinivasa Ramanujan. We've explored his brilliant math, his incredible journey, those cultural clashes, and even those crazy Mach theta functions that seem to predict the future of math. But why is his story still so captivating all these years later? What makes him more than just some name you see in a textbook?
I think it goes beyond just the math. There's something about Ramanujan's story that really grabs you. It speaks to that human desire to understand our place in the universe.
So it's not just about equations and formulas.
Well, those are important, of course. His discoveries in number theory, infinite series, continued fractions, they're still super relevant today.
And it's not just what he discovered, right? It's how he did it. Those leaps of intuition, seeing patterns that nobody else could, almost like he had some secret power.
Exactly. And that's what makes him so fascinating. He reminds us that there's more to knowledge than just logic. You need intuition, creativity, that spark of genius you can't really teach.
He showed that brilliance can come from anywhere.
Exactly. He didn't follow the usual path to academic success. No fancy degrees, but he still made discoveries that some of the best mathematicians couldn't figure out.
Makes you wonder how many other Ramanujans are out there. What if he hadn't found that old textbook? What if he'd given up after all those rejections?
It's a good point. We need to be better at recognizing talent, no matter where it comes from or what your background is. Ramanujan's story is a reminder that we need to make space for different ways of thinking, to be open to unconventional paths.
Because sometimes those paths lead to the biggest breakthroughs. Okay, but let's shift gears a bit. His story had a huge impact in India, right? He was more than just a mathematician. He was like a national hero.
Definitely. Especially back then when India was fighting for independence. He showed the world what Indian intellect was capable of. It was a huge source of pride.
And it helped challenge all those stereotypes and prejudices that were around back then.
For sure. He proved that brilliance doesn't belong to any one culture or country.
But beyond all the math and the cultural impact, there's also the personal side. He went through so much: poverty, illness, being isolated in a foreign country.
His story's all about resilience. Never giving up on your passion, no matter what.
It's that spirit, that refusal to let anything hold him back, that's so inspiring. It shows that we all have the potential to do amazing things if we're willing to chase our dreams.
And maybe that's his greatest legacy. The reminder that the human spirit, that desire to learn and explore, can overcome anything.
A powerful message, especially today. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this. What secrets are still hidden in those notebooks? What other mathematical truths are waiting to be uncovered? Maybe, just maybe, the next Ramanujan is out there right now, ready to blow our minds, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and never underestimate the power of a curious mind. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Srinivasa Ramanujan.